So it's been almost to this day about 2 years now since my first discovery in the Orion Nebula. And for those of you that have been looking at the stuff I've been doing now for 2 years, know that I've been providing you with an enormous amount of confirming data. From what we see everywhere in these cathedrals to leveraging the work of researchers such as Manly Hall, Robert Bauval, Graham Hancock, John Anthony West, and others. And so what we have discovered recently is that the hieroglyphics from the ancient Egyptians and from the Babylonians are both pointing to the same area, the pineal gland. You can see this by the pine cone right here, presenting it up here to this wing disc. That's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be taking a look at the wing disc, the symbolism surrounding it, and where it's found. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to take a step further. We're going to push further into the mystical and look at the symbolism. Thanks to Manly Hall in recent videos that you may have seen, some of the more entertaining ones, sometimes it is helpful to have audio excerpts from people such as Manly Hall and present the visual material showing the confirmation while he's doing the talking, which is what I was doing. One of the main things that we needed to confirm was we needed to confirm this whole idea that I had kept seeing with the profile of a person. This is exactly what Manly Hall confirmed for us with macroprosopis, the long face, the one whose face is always in profile. That's exactly what we see. We see this in nature, and we see it in different scales. And one of the other things that we needed to confirm was we needed to confirm this idea of the pyramid and it representing the human body. And as we saw in the previous video, I believe it was the one before last, where I showed the one with the pyramids and universal mind, Manly Hall also confirmed this for us as well. And that is that this represented the tomb of Hermes to the Neoplatonic mystics, that this area or this pyramid represented a diagram of universal mind. The best thing about all this is that I found the stuff first, made my analysis, and then came back and found that Manly Hall confirmed it for me. It's much better than finding it from Manly Hall and then going out and looking for it. This way we actually get a confirmation. And so in both of these cases, the profile face and the tomb of Hermes representing symbolically universal mind, we can see how this kind of works now, and we can see that there's some confirmation here. We can see that nature does provide this particular pattern, and what we're going to dig into today is we're going to move into the Orion Nebula and begin to take a look at the symbolism that's contained within it. Once again, I want to quote from R. A. Schwaller de Lubic's Ancient Egypt Science and the Evolution of Consciousness, this particular paragraph, which reads, "The symbolic attitude of ancient knowledge cultivated the intellect to the extent of perceiving all of the phenomena of nature itself as a symbolic writing revealing the forces of laws governing the energetic, even the spiritual aspects of our universe." What does this mean? Well, what it means is that the nature itself, or physical reality that we see in nature, communicates in hieroglyphics, and not just to the extent of the leaf matching a tree, fractals, natural fractals, but it actually communicates consciously, as if a person were communicating to you. Something, when it needs to communicate a message, it does it consciously. And it does it through hieroglyphics, much like what we see in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. Since this is the way that the ancient Egyptians understood that nature communicated, then it's only logical to assume that they would apply the same type of hieroglyphic writing in their hieroglyphs, or hieroglyphic meaning in the way that they did their hieroglyphs. For example, we discovered that the pattern, the macroprosopis pattern, the profile of the long face right here, that we discovered and then finally confirmed by Manly Hall is also seen in the Egyptians and what they were doing. And they showed us the same thing right here, where the way his foot is basically represents the sacrum and so forth. And so they were utilizing this communication that nature presents to us, and what it actually ends up doing when we start getting into the Orion Nebula here in a second is it uses the various portions. For example, the person's eye right here has a specific meaning, but it also has a specific meaning to the larger picture of the tree and him inside it, because it represents the third eye together. And this is the way that nature does it as well. Each particular thing inside the larger picture may have its own meaning, but it also has a meaning to the larger image as well. And they all interconnect and overlap, and they give you complex information. By seeing them by themselves, you would get a disconnected meaning behind whatever it is that you're looking at. You might say, for example, at the center of the Orion Nebula, you see this bright yellow triangle by itself. But when it's combined with the whole larger image and where it's placed and knowing what the larger image is, then it has even more meaning. And so when all of these things are combined together, they give complex meanings behind the metaphysical understandings of ourselves and reality. So we're going to press further today. We're going to go into more of the symbolism behind what's in the Orion Nebula. I understand that this information has been suppressed for a long time, and I understand that there is a number of people out there that are trying to keep this information suppressed. It's just not going to work, because the truth is going to come out. And the wonderful thing about the truth is when you begin to go down the path of truth, everything just begins to fall into place. And what the Orion constellation and the Orion Nebula, if anything, has served as so far, and the reason I have stuck with it for as long as I have, is because it has uncovered many of the ancient truths that have been hidden from us for so long. Because we can take a look at it, and we can look at it when we look at something harder than just at a glance, the way people normally look at things when people walk outside, or when people just lollygag along, they don't look at anything, they don't ever really look at something. When you begin to do that in nature, you begin to understand that there is a communication that's happening in nature. What I have discovered so far is the Orion constellation, and so I use it. If it has served as anything so far, it has served as a master key in order to unlock hidden mysteries about us and our reality and the metaphysics of the universe. And so when we take a look at the Orion constellation, we look at it with this detail view showing the Barnard's loop, or the Orion loop going around the whole constellation. We can see, and as I've shown you before, that is basically a Fibonacci spiral, and that spiral goes right into the Orion Nebula. And that has been found in multiple cathedrals as well. And in many of these cases, we've seen that there are angels circling around this bright spot. It seems to be located in the Orion Nebula. When we take a look at these Egyptian reliefs, what we notice is that after mapping the human body, when I come over here to the Orion constellation, and knowing that this is the head, and knowing that the Orion Nebula is also the representation of that profile long face, the macroprosopis, then I can use the Orion constellation as a key in order to come back over here and have a good idea as to where I need to place the center of that vortex. And this is the way that the Orion constellation, in a very simple example, provides us information that may take much longer otherwise to figure out. So it is because of this that we learned that this is the way that we're supposed to map this with the golden rectangle, because it's separated by the coccyx to the atlas and axis vertebrae, and then the smaller square in all its detail maps the internal part of the brain, from the brainstem to the pineal gland, ending where these three lines right here meet and where we also see the same 3 lines in the golden rectangle. So because of the Orion Nebula giving us a clue as to how to look at this, this has always been a master key in order to help me unlock things about what I have found from either the collective unconscious or to Egypt and to the ancients and so forth. This is what this Orion Nebula has served as a key. And so when we take a look at the Orion Nebula here, after taking a look in the cathedrals kept showing us something circling around this bright area. Now we know, like we saw a second ago, we have these various areas of the Orion Nebula. The whole Orion Nebula itself maps out a profile, once again, of a sagittal look of a brain. So when we look at it all together, we see a brain, but then we have this particular area of focus that we look at, and that area of focus obviously is this yellow triangle right here. That yellow triangle within the whole understanding that this is all a brain right here, this triangle right here is located right where is the same triangular area that surrounds the pineal gland. And so this is what NASA has not shown you. And this was also what was found in cathedrals. And because people don't ever look at anything more than just a glance, it's the reason it hasn't been discovered so far. So now when we take a look in the very center of the Orion Nebula, in the center of the yellow triangle, we can clearly see a funnel, a white tornado with a black disk, and a funnel coming out the other side with large rings going around it. This is what is in the very center of this yellow triangle that, guess what, also seems to it also matches the slopes of the pyramid at 51 degrees. So when we take a look at this by itself, we go, wow. And you can see how we have this vortex centering itself by itself, but it's also now overlapped symbolically. It's overlapped by being inside the very middle of something that matches the slope of the pyramid. So now we have a vortex inside something that matches the slopes of the pyramid. So by itself, it means vortex. Inside this yellow triangle, it means something even more complex. And then backing out even more, knowing that this area is actually the area that's contained inside the pineal gland, now we get a much even more complex understanding of what this is. And so now when we take a look at this as an analogy to the human body, we gain a pretty good glimpse into what we may be looking at metaphysically when we take a look at the pineal gland. And we can back this up by taking a look at the various artwork from around the world all the way back to ancient times. And what we see on Buddha's forehead is we see a vortex. What we see on these other gods and so forth, we see vortexes. We see this thing about the pineal gland and the third eye. So as you can see, we have a perfect representation of a brain here. But you might ask, Danny, well, how did you come up with the idea that it looks like a brain in the first place? Well, what we actually do is we switch back and forth between nature and what is called the collective unconscious. And the collective unconscious is where people pick up on things that just come out in their art, basically. They're not even aware of it. And I know that this is the case, and it's not special knowledge because I see it randomly happening all over the place by artists. And what the collective unconscious is it is, if you can imagine that we are all one soul that's been fragmented into a whole matrix of people like we are right now. We all think we're separate, but we all actually belong to the same soul. I covered this in the Son of Man. Well, we all share these common images that belong to all of us, these same common patterns. And what we see in some of the very famous artists, such as Michelangelo, is that they pull these particular patterns out of their unconscious. And what neurologists have determined is that Michelangelo painted a brain, even though they turned it around wrong in their analysis. But knowing that, and knowing that he mapped us to the Orion Nebula, there's our link to take a look at the Orion Nebula as a brain, and of course it mapped just perfectly. So it is by switching back and forth between nature and the collective unconscious that we can gain a lot of insight into knowledge that has been either suppressed, hidden, or forgotten for a very, very long time. So let's get into the winged disc, because that's what we want to talk about in this particular video. And what we're going to see is that the ancients also did the same thing with the winged disc, much like what we see that Michelangelo did with the Orion Nebula right here. Okay, so I think the best way to go about doing this is to establish links to build on. The first thing that we see here is the Egyptian relief, and we've already confirmed all the way down to the smallest details, even with the Eye of Ra, down to the vortex, down to the various lines inside this relief, the size of the spinal column, and what have you, as many different details as you've seen in previous videos. That this is what they were doing. They were measuring from the sacrum to the pineal gland. This can be seen in their reliefs. It can also be seen on the Nile, and it can also be referenced in the pyramid texts, and also the Book of Coming Forth by Day, referencing various locations on the Nile and their association to the human body and their metaphysics as well. So now we need to link this to something that contains the winged disc. And we did that because we saw that the Babylonian Tree of Life was doing the exact same thing, measuring the sacrum. And notice the major lines inside this golden rectangle. The mid-phi line is located right at the base of the tail feathers, and this next horizontal line that we see, the larger one up here, is at the top of the wings of this winged disc. And so the pineal gland is located right in the center of the vortex, which is located right in the center of the winged disc. And we have a further confirmation of this with the pine cone. I also have an additional confirmation that the Babylonians were doing the same thing, because we can take a look at the hands of the Egyptians. The fist is located right in the center of the rib cage, located right in the center of the rib cage in the Babylonian relief here as well. So now we have another link between the two. Additionally, I also have one other piece of confirmation that I found after I did the hieroglyph here, and it comes from an audio excerpt from Manly Hall. I have a series that I need to upload here soon for everybody. It's called Babylonian Creation Myths, which I just happened to listen to the other night, and it contains an audio excerpt. I want to play it for you. You'll have to pardon the audio. It's cleaned as best as it is, but if you'll listen to what he has to say about the Babylonians real quick, we can see another confirmation.
And when we understand the purposes and meanings of the ancient priesthood and their ritualistic dramas, their instructions, and all of their teachings, we find that they were the custodians of processes and methods of human development and discipline, very similar to the yogic exercises of India. In other words, they were the custodians of a science of the release of the divine in man.
So, what he just said there was that everything that I've been showing you with the hieroglyphs, the exercises that he was speaking of, and the releasing of the divine in man, is exactly what this relief is showing right here, mapping out the human body and the chakras, and the top of this being the pineal gland. So we have the winged disk representing this area. And that's key, because now we need to flip over and take a look at the Orion Nebula. Before we do that, I want to show you some of the other cultures that were actually doing the same thing. Since we've already established that the ancient Egyptians were doing this, and we can link that to the Babylonians and the winged disk, then we can perform a logical deduction that other cultures utilizing something very similar were more than likely doing the same thing. For example, based on the similarities that we see between the Babylonian tree and some of these other guys, and knowing that they were using or practicing that type of system, then we see these other ones that look very similar, the Dagon, and we see the Sumerian tree of life right here. And then we see these other variations, these guys holding up this right here. Then this gives us insight into the meaning metaphysically of the winged disk. Down here we have Faravahar inside this. And notice what we see right here is we see something very similar to what we see in Christian art. We see him holding his two fingers up, or holding his finger up to the sky, holding a staff in his left hand. We see the same thing, Jesus right here. This is a very common thing that you'll see with Jesus, him holding his right hand up with two fingers pointing to the sky. And we can see the variations of these winged discs as they have moved through the various cultures. Right here is almost identical between ancient Egyptian and Zoroastrian, which is what you see right here. This is Zoroastrian, which is the same thing as Faravahar. But in most of these cultures, we see something almost the same, and that is a man that is inside a winged disk, representing something related to higher consciousness, because we know that from the Babylonian relief. So this represents spirit. It doesn't have anything to do with Anunnaki or UFOs. It's the same image. It is the same symbolic image, and it represents spirit and the release of the soul is what it represents. It represents the center of the vortex inside this golden rectangle. So now we can see that all these cultures, and this is one of the things I feel is very important in showing people, because we have so much of the demonization going on all these various cultures. This culture and that culture is evil. This culture is evil. And then when we actually take a look and do some real analysis behind what's going on here, then we can see that we have a lot more in common with each other than we do than we are separate from each other. There are some fundamental beliefs that exist and have existed for a very long time, and we can see where the misinterpretation and the perversion of teachings has happened over the centuries. We have the winged disk here. We see that they've all seen this winged disk. We see it in these various cultures. It wasn't just all copied over, because we see the same thing in the Mayan cultures too. Even their Mayan sun god bears the resemblance of something that looks similar to this. So now the next question would be, since they are all seeing the same thing, and since we have a pattern of these other artists over the centuries seeing these same patterns, and they've been turning up in the Orion Nebula, well, and we already know that there is an area out there that represents the pineal gland in the Orion Nebula, then our logic should tell us that we would find something out there that represents this winged disk. And in fact, there is. So this is the visual version of the Orion Nebula. And we know that the area that represents the pineal gland is right here. It's right in the center of that yellow triangle. So there is nothing out here in this full visual spectrum version that looks anything like a winged disk. Well, the interesting thing about this is that we also know that in the collective unconscious artwork found in cathedrals, Karlskirch is a great example, that not only have people over the centuries depicted things in the visual version, but they've also depicted things in the infrared version of the Orion Nebula. So in this exact same area, if we take a look, this is an image, an original image by Caltech showing the infrared version of the Orion Nebula, and as you can see, the very bright area of the Orion Nebula, there is this pattern that we can see right here. The interesting thing about some of these patterns is that unless you are familiar with them, you will not spot them. And this is why I've always told people that a very good thing to do is to fill your head and burn into your head as many symbols as you can possibly find out there. And that is because if you actually see something in nature, it will automatically pop into your visual because you are familiar with what it looks like. So what I have done to make this easier for some of you to see is there is actually a winged disc right here actually containing a man and his profile looking to the right. And what I've done to make it easier for everyone to see is I have included it as a comparative analysis between the original winged disc that we see right here on the Babylonian art. Notice he is holding the pine cone up to it. So this represents the same area that we saw in the full visual spectrum. So when we take the same image from Caltech that we see right here, same image, and what we're going to do is put that right here as a comparative analysis next to Babylonian art. And as you can see, we have the same winged disc sitting right out here, right here, located right here, and we can see the obvious similarities, located in the exact same place that it should be, with the same characteristics. A man inside pointing his head to the right, and we see that another interesting symbol here is that in the very center of that winged disc, it's darker, a little darkering right here, and what looks to be like an iris of an eye, because eyes are vortexes. And so when we flipped over from the visual spectrum to the infrared spectrum, we now see something a little bit different. We see another vortex, but the vortex is represented as an eye. So we get this this symbolism where the physical represents a pineal gland, but the infrared, or the one that is out of the visible spectrum, gives us a view into the symbolism related to the metaphysical aspects of man. And that represents spirit, or soul, or the release of the soul right here. This is spirit. Because even in the Bible, it says that God is spirit. And it even says that God has his place in the whirlwind, and you'll see that word whirlwind a lot in the Bible representing God, representing spirit. And so there we go. We can see symbolism has confirmed itself once again, and so more than likely the ancients were pulling from the collective unconscious when they were seeing this metaphysical representation. They're also seeing the same area flipped over from the visual spectrum to the infrared spectrum of the Orion Nebula. This is a little bit of an insight into the way that symbolism works in nature that we can discover so far. The Orion Nebula has played a key role so far in doing a lot of this for us. Oh, one more thing. I will be, at this point, beginning to design the next book I'm going to write on this stuff, because there's so much material, and I've had a lot of people that have been asking for the next book. This next book that is probably going to take a little bit of time to do. I wouldn't expect it out probably until next year. It's going to have a lot of detail in it. It will probably touch on the previous material, but it's going to be expected to be comprehensive because it would be too much to put into one book. Additionally, this time around, I will be working towards a publisher and also paperback versions as well as Kindle versions. So I'm going to be putting it into multiple formats. There are many who have wanted paperback versions, and I was not able to do that the first time. Obviously lots of illustrations and everything else, because images is one of the main ways that I like to communicate, and I think it is probably a very necessary way to communicate, since words always get corrupted. Anyways, I will talk to you guys soon. Y'all have a great weekend.